Joining us today to give his thoughts on the latest developments, we have with us Dr. Jung-yeop, a research fellow at the Sejong Institute here in Korea. It's good to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So there was much movement over the weekend. Let's start with that announcement of the location for the North Korea-U.S. summit. Trump confirmed on Twitter that it will be taking place in Hanoi. Speculation went back and forth over which place it would take place, either Hanoi or Da Nang. And there were some reports that said the US and the North Koreans had different location preferences. So now they've decided on Hanoi. Is there one side this location works better for, or does it not really matter that much?
Yeah, there was a report that the U.S. government preferred to have the meeting at Da Nang in Vietnam. But I think it's a matter of convenience rather than more political issues for the U.S. government. Because there was a APEC meeting in 2017 in Da Nang. U.S. government already did a security checkup for its president. So it's easy for them to redo it. However, more political meaning is carried on by having a meeting at Hanoi for North Korean government, because there's a high possibility that the Vietnamese government is going to invite North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as a state guest. And it has also practical meaning for North Korea. We observed in Singapore last year that Singaporean government invited Kim Jong-un as a state visit guest. In that way, Singaporean government can pay for the expenses for the North Korean delegations staying in Singapore. So I think that for North Korea, visiting Hanoi is more of political meaning and much more weight than U.S. convenience in having Da Nang. So I think that's why U.S. gave small concession to North Korean government.
Would you still say it is a small concession?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Would you say as in it is something the U.S. is giving to North Korea, at least a little something?
Yeah. It is clear that the U.S. prefers Da Nang, and now the U.S. agrees to have the meeting at Hanoi. So it's a small concession, but it's very difficult for the U.S. to demand North Korea to give back something in return because of this small concession.
Also during the weekend, the U.S. Special Representative of North Korea, Biegun, he returned from 3 days of talks, working-level talks in Pyongyang, and he said the talks were productive, but that there was still some hard work left to do. What do you make about the content of the talks, and what do we know about it, and what impression did you get from Biegun's comments?
So even if Stephen Biegun made a huge progress while he was in Pyongyang for 2 nights, however, because he has to save the best for the presidential meeting at the end of February. However, it will be very difficult for them to find the middle ground at this time because there was a huge difference between two governments. And Stephen Biegun mentioned before he left Pyongyang that U.S. is not ready to ease the sanctions for the North Korean government. However, what North Korean government needed is lifting sanctions or easing the sanction. So it is very unlikely that two sides find the middle ground and to reconcile the differences about whether there is going to be easing the sanctions or lifting sanctions. So I think there was discussions by two sides on every issue. However, it might be very difficult for them to reach an agreement at this time.
Before Biegun returned to Washington, he stopped off in Seoul to brief South Korean officials about what had gone on in Pyongyang. And among some of the things he is reported to have said, he described the talks not as a negotiation and that it was more about a meeting to put forward their positions. Does that suggest then that they might not have made much headway towards some sort of agreement towards their summit?
So it is a productive meeting, and there was a progress since we didn't have this kind of talks in the latter half of 2018. So from Mr. Biegun's point of view, that there was a progress by having this kind of talks with his counterpart, who's now official position is special representative for the U.S. policy in State Committee. So I think that is a huge progress from the U.S. point of view. However, as we just discussed, that there is a huge difference between two governments about what kind of corresponding measures should be provided to the North Korean Korean governments for what it already took, like dismantlement of Punggye-ri and removing of like Dongchang-rim missile engine site. And then what North Korea wants is that if U.S. is providing some kind of corresponding measures, which means easing the sanctions or lifting sanctions, then North Korea might be able to consider that dismantlement of Yongbyon nuclear facilities. So there's this huge differences between two governments. So I think the time is too short for them to reach an agreement on these issues this time.
You mentioned many things there, but Biegun's comments, not a negotiation. I mean, it does sound like, it was just laying out their positions, but to do that for 3 days seems, I don't know, it doesn't seem to add up to me. They must have had some sort of maybe give and take or some sort of negotiation, really, shouldn't they?
So I think that it carries some kind of meaning. When he mentioned that it's not negotiation, that means that when it comes to the negotiation, you have to agree on what kind of destinations you agree to reach, right? But in Singapore, we have some like vague meaning of the goal of the negotiations. So President Trump and Chairman Kim agrees to work toward the complete denuclearization of Korean Peninsula. But South Korea's Minister of Unification mentioned during the National Assembly meeting that the meaning of the complete denuclearization of Korean Peninsula is different in North Korea from international community's view on that same term. So when they don't agree on the complete denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, it's going to be very difficult for them to find a way to reach that point. So I think that the first thing that Stephen Biegun might demand North Korea to agree is what that term's definition is.
There has been speculation that the U.S. is willing to make some sort of compromises and agree on some sort of small deal towards North Korea's denuclearization. However, interestingly, South Korea's spokesperson, Blue House spokesperson, weighed in and said, when asked directly about this, he said it's not the position of the administration, the small deal, and that they are on the same page as Washington on this. What should we make of that comment?
So regardless of what kind of measures were exchanged by U.S. government and North Korean government, small deal implies that that deal does not guarantee that it's going to denuclearize North Korea. So anything that does not guarantee the full and verified denuclearization of North Korea, it should not be satisfying to the international community, including South Korean government. So any deal can be made at this point, but that deal should lead to the final denuclearization of North Korea in the end. But if there is no guarantee of FFVD, but they made a certain deal to continue the dialogue, it should not be satisfying to the South Korean government. I think that Blue House spokesperson mentioned in that way.
Let's bring it back to that report we started with. As mentioned, many U.S. politicians have already expressed their doubts over what Trump can bring back from his summit with Kim Jong-un. What does Trump need to bring back? What kind of deal does it have to be that can convince his critics that he's done a good deal, or at least silence them of the criticisms?
The critical view is coming from the fact that Chairman Kim has never specified what the complete denuclearization of Korean Peninsula means. So we expect that by using the term complete denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, we expect that North Korea would abandon all its nuclear weapons and programs, which was specified in 2005 September 19 joint agreement. In that joint agreement, North Korea specified that it's going to abandon all of its nuclear weapons and programs and going back to the non-proliferation treaty, and it's going to be inspected by IAEA. But the terms that we used in Singapore summit did not specify all those conditions that should be achieved at the end of the negotiation. So if President Trump and Chairman Kim agrees to define what the complete denuclearization of a Korean Peninsula, I think there is going to be much more like positive views spread in Washington.
What's quite curious at the moment actually is the North Korean state media has yet to make any mention of the upcoming summit, either the date or the location or any of those details. We talked a little bit about this last time, but why do you think they're avoiding talking about this, and how long can that go on for?
I think that when Chairman Kim is going to leave for Vietnam for the summit with President Trump, they are going to announce in the state media or the media that North Korea controls. However, at this time, that it is unlikely to have that kind of report in North Korean media because North Korean government cannot be sure that what kind of deal they are going to have. So if North Korea is going to get some kind of like political or diplomatic measures from the U.S. government, it's very difficult for them to convince its own people because now the political or diplomatic relations with the United States improved, but without sanction lift, the economic condition of the North Korea will continue to be the same. Then it's going to be difficult for the North Korean regime to convince its own people that they are doing the great thing for its own people. So I think it's why that they are very cautious on making this public to its own people.
Do you think they might be holding back as well because there's a possibility that it could also be postponed or cancelled again, like last time what happened as well?
In the last time that the cancellation from the President Trump was caused by the letter and the statement by the North Korean government official. So I doubt that North Korean government or government officials would do the same thing again. Then it's going to be less likely that President Trump canceled the meeting this time.
And finally, the Blue House, South Korea's Blue House, has also said that President Moon will be holding a phone call with President Trump in the near future about these upcoming summit. And South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa will also be meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo soon as well. So a lot of interaction going on between South Korea and the U.S. over this upcoming summit. But then actually, what is South Korea's role in this? What does South Korea have to do with this next summit?
The first thing is that we have to know what the differences are between United States and North Korean government. So if there is anything that South Korean government narrow the differences, then we should do it. And second, that last time that President Trump mentioned that he's going to suspend all the military drills between the allies without mentioning to South Korean government in advance. So avoiding that kind of surprise is also the important thing for the Korean government this time. So I think that is why the Blue House mentioned that President Moon is going to talk with President Trump about all the various issues this time.
What do you think the South Korea are expecting from this summit? What are the points that they're looking forward to?
We really don't know yet because what differences are there between the United States and North Korean government. So I think finding out what kind of differences and how big the differences are is very important for South Korean government to know that.
Well, we're looking forward to this next summit. We hope you get your thoughts on it when it does happen as well.
Thank you
for coming today.
Thank you.